Hi, friends, and welcome to the Fellowship's monthly podcast. We have been featuring people who have received a Second Miler grant to do special projects, and today I'm delighted to have Bobbie Dreier Gard Jameson. Bobbie's a longtime servant of the movement and helps in every possible way she can, and is tireless. She's the Energizer Bunny. I've never seen her stop. She's such a true servant of the movement, and Gard is a trustee of Urantia Foundation, and everything I just said for Bobbie is true for you too, Gard. You two are two mentors and heroes to so many in this movement, and so many look up to you for wisdom and inspiration. And what a delight to be able to interview you about this special Second Miler project that you're doing. It's all about source authors of the Urantia book and source works that were used. We all know that the revelators say, right? He says right in the beginning, doesn't he? The divine counselor, he says, we were instructed to use human sources wherever possible. And then, and he's very matter of fact about it. And then a midwayer goes on at length and explains why they were instructed and how rigid and rigorous was their mandate to use human sources. So this project is Sources of Revelatory Insight, a meditation on the human sources, of course, the human sources of the Urantia book. And I'm so glad to interview you guys because I have personally so many opinions about this, and I feel so strongly about it. Matthew Block used to call me when I was working for Mo at Jesusonian Foundation, and he was working for John at the Fellowship. We were like counterparts. And he would call me every day and tell me, I found a source book today. I was just walking down the street, and something told me, go in there. And I told him, you are being guided to these. Do you realize that you're being guided to these? And there's a reason for that. And he would always poo-poo that. But I felt very strongly that he was getting some celestial guidance to these source books. And he collected quite a few, and so did your lovely, wonderful husband, Steve Dreier, Bobbie, who decided, I think, at some point, if Matthew's going to put so much into this, and do so much research, then we ought to be conversant with it. And he took it upon himself to be very conversant with the source authors. And I know you two have Gard, and you have now a source author library at Urantia Foundation, which is invaluable, I'm sure, and will be for scholars going forward. So welcome, you guys. I'm so glad to have you. And we can start with you, Gard. What is the passion here to create this this work so that more people can understand the source authors of the Urantia book, the human source authors?
Thank you, Paula. And by the way, back at you in terms of tireless toiler. You are one of my great inspirations, and I love you so much.
Thank you.
And, you know, I've always loved books. I took my degree in liberal arts, and I just love reading. And it was in 1972 that I was in this book store called The Plowshare, and these people were talking about Jesus and his early life. And I realized this was not in the Bible. And that's when I got the Urantia book. And it was not till I got back to my dormitory, put it on the shelf, and about a week later, a fellow student came by and says, I hear you like spiritual things. I said, yeah. He said, I just had an incredible experience of spirit. For a week, I was on cloud nine. And I said, well, here's a book that might help illuminate your experience. Not even having read, I gave it to him. And he came back. His name was Brian Cox. Some of you know him. And he knocked on my door and he said, Gard, do you know what you have here? I said, a book? He said, no, you have a revelation.
Wow.
And that's when my journey began as a freshman at Stanford. And it was in the late 80s that I was reading a wonderful book, because I like old bookstores like the two of you do. And it was called 40,000 Sublime and Beautiful Thoughts.
Ooh.
Who would not want to read a book like that? Sublime and Beautiful Thoughts. And so I was reading in it, and oh my gosh, that looks like Urantia. And so it was then, and this is, I think a few people don't know this story, that I turned to a fellow named Matthew Block, who was at the Wrightwood office. And I said, Matthew, look at what I found. And so I'm afraid I unleashed a monster because Matthew just went at this like a pit bull. And it was a wonderful, just watching Matthew, as you said, Paula, sort of navigate the streets, navigate the text, and do real scholar's work around each of the
Yes.
texts that he was discovering. It wasn't just, aha, here's another Easter egg. He would open it up and he would analyze it in really wonderful ways that have blessed all of us. And I think Steve was greatly the beneficiary of that, as was I.
He had a magnificent obsession with it, didn't he? And he still does. Clearly, he still does. And Google has made his job so much easier in that regard.
Yeah.
So that is something I didn't know, that you lit that candle. That's great. That's so great to know. And Bobbie, was I accurate when I said that Steve decided at some point there's got to be more people that are really conversant with these source authors and what they wrote and who they were. And I remember he did a remarkable talk on the personalists, and his delving into the source authors really led him on that journey too. And he had such keen insights about them. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about his passion and why you and Gard want to do this project together.
I suppose you remember when Matthew started publicizing his findings, there was a lot of resistance, and I think there were some people who may have left the Urantia book thinking, well, if there's any human sources, then it's not a revelation. It was pretty unpleasant at that time. Matthew was getting a lot of negative feedback, and a lot of people were kind of upset. Do you remember that?
I totally remember it.
Yeah. So Steve said, well, he really was a truth seeker, Steve. I mean, he delved deeply into anything he was interested in. And he was working with Matthew at the time. I guess he was president of the fellowship at the time, and Matthew was in the office. So they were together quite a lot. And he decided to look into it. And once he did, he was deeply taken by how important he felt the work of the human source authors was. And I think he really wanted to dispel the fear and help people to understand that only good could come from examining the truth. The truth never hurts from an honest examination. And he dove deeply into the source books that Matthew was finding, and then started to create a collection himself, and eventually had a full library of pretty much all of the source books. But he was so happy when Gard took an interest, because he was looking for someone, with whom he could talk regularly about it. And I think they spent an awful lot of time sharing their insights and helping each other to really appreciate and go deeply into to what they were learning, and how much they felt an understanding and a good thorough reading of the source books could enhance understanding of the concepts in the Urantia book. Because as the divine counselor says, or I think it's the divine counselor who says, the source authors, the human authors, were really used so that the concepts could have greater access to human minds. And that's, I think because of Steve and because of Gard, the idea of human source contribution to the Urantia book has become more acceptable. And I don't think there's so much fear in the community anymore.
Yeah, they use that big P word. And everybody going, it was plagiarized. Oh my gosh, but in fact, I think of them more as translators, because when you, in my opinion, and it's the midwayer that really set me on this course, when he gives that, that qualifier, it's like, it's parenthetical, but it's a whole page of information about their mandate. And he talks about, the human thought construct. And then in light of the fact that we're isolated and we really have no concept to build these beautiful, facts that they were, and revelations that they were giving us, we have no context for them. And they wouldn't mean much to us without those human authors. And I realized that every revelation has its human aspect too, right? Jesus became a man. Why did he become a man? Because he could make God visible to us as a man, right? And why did Adam and Eve have their human associates and their human helpers, and they were in material bodies? And why did the prince come down with a corporeal staff? All of these things make these revelations approachable to us. And I think no less of the human source authors, that without them, the whole book would read like the foreword. And that would be a disaster. No one would get anything from it. I mean, they would maybe in the future, but they simply had to make it palatable for us. And I always think of the mother robin who, regurgitates the food to give to the babies so that they can eat it, so they can tolerate it. And that's what the source authors did. And that's just my theory. And I wonder if you guys have given any thought to why it was so important. I mean, they literally spell out that this was very important, that they use these source authors. Why do you think that is? That's my theory. But I just think that's what it is. They couldn't have given it to us any other way. It wouldn't have made much sense to us any other way.
Well, you've probably seen that movie with Bill Murray, Lost in Translation. And again, if you're a divine counselor and you're coming to a very primitive planet like this, it's going to be lost in translation unless you have, as Melchizedek had, Abraham, unless you have, as Van had, Amadon. And so you have these human conduits. And I think the other piece of it, Paula, is that the universe wants us to know that auto-revelation is very real.
There you go.
And absolutely accessible to each of us as individuals. And when we get that, then something extraordinary. So as Steve and I were reading and talking about these texts, we were just blown away by the magnificence of each of the personalities that were used. So there were 5 partners in the revelation. There was the Revelatory Commission, who were the celestials. There was the contact personality, who was a humble, and I want to add to the contact personality his wife, because she put up with this for 50 years. And she was there as humble as he, and both of them extraordinary personalities. And then there was the Contact Commission, right, who was an extraordinary small group of individuals who produced this text and who really saw the mechanics of it. And then there was the Forum, right? And the Forum was so important in helping the Revelatory Commission to do just what the human sources are doing, which is humanizing divine concepts, divine values and meanings. And then you had these source authors, which again, for anybody that's out there and listening, it is such a delight and such a treat to be able to read the likes of Ralph Tyler Llewellyn, be able to read Rufus Jones, to be able to read Ernest Tittle, and to read, if you will, what these midwares were looking at as they were gathering, like a professor, they were gathering this material to present this 5th epochal revelation. They must have been delighted to see these incredible individuals, both men and women, who emerged primarily during the 20th century and late 19th century, who were really keyed into spiritual perception, as the book says, a perception of truth and beauty and goodness.
And they were prolific in their own right.
Oh, yes.
And I think one benefit clearly is the fact that now you can explore these topics in depth through their writings as well. So they take you even deeper than the book does in some ways, in many ways.
No, it's so true. I I told Steve I was like a little kid in a candy store when I went to Haverford College, and I went into the library of Rufus Jones, who Steve and I just absolutely adored. And when you read Rufus Jones, you're reading cosmic consciousness. You're reading an individual whose quality of awareness is really one of the most superlative, insightful personalities to ever walk the planet. And he's little known now, but in his day, he was quite a figure. He actually won the Nobel Peace Prize, which a lot of people don't know, in 1947 for the remediation work that they did during World War I. And when I say they, the Quaker community, Rufus was in charge of it, along with Hoover and others. But Rufus was he wasn't just an academic. He was boots on the ground. He was in Europe. He was helping to bring Europe back after the First World War.
Wow. So, Bobbie, you pointed out that some people lost faith in the book because of the revelations of these source authors. We knew because we read it in the book that they existed. We just didn't know who they were. And suddenly, Gard and Matthew and others started finding them, and especially Matthew. He like you said, he went after it, and he found so many of them. Why do you think? I mean, what was your reaction when you first started hearing about these source authors, and did it shake your faith at all, or did you, or what was your reaction to it?
No, I guess I could say Steve and I were a team, but really, I was just a big supporter of whatever he was doing. And I must say I never read them in the kind of depth that he did, but he would often say to me, "Look at this," and then he would share what he was finding with me. And I was very proud of him that he was standing up for what he believed was something that was very valuable in the face of all the negativity that was flying around it. And I feel very happy now that it's sort of become an accepted part of the revelation that people understand, because the statements that I think it's the in the Jesus papers, the introduction there, where the midwife basically says that he was more of an editor,
Right,
than an author, collecting material from the sources. So I think it's become part of the mainstream of the studies now, or at least of the belief in the Urantia book. I don't think you have people leaving the Urantia book anymore, because it's clear that there has been some human work that has been used in compiling what the information is. So I was excited that that he was doing that, and
what
I'm
a
excited that Gard got interested in it too, because of course working with Gard is like an incredible privilege. So it's wonderful to be able to continue.
well, you would know that so well because you two have worked together on so many things, and you're great collaborators. So that makes perfect sense to me. But yeah, the what an editing job! What a beautiful weaving of concepts, and when the closer you look at it, the more magnificent it becomes. Really, the job that they did in bringing us this revelation. Everything that I ever encounter with this just makes me respect it and love it more. So yeah,
It's not only enlightening concepts, but there's a spiritual aspect to it too. There's the story of the woman caught in adultery, where actually in the Bible, she was basically betrayed by her husband, who set her up, and then she was she was a sinner. Basically, she was told, go and sin no more, in the Bible. And when in the Bible, Jesus says, go and sin no more. Actually, that's what the Bible story is. In the Urantia book, he says, I know that you have not done any evil, and go in peace. I mean, I'm not quoting it exactly, but but the
Hmm.
the light that he was able to shine on, or the light that the Urantia book is able to shine on who Jesus was. The contrast between the biblical and the Urantia book version of this is very, very telling, because Jesus knew who the woman was, and the Urantia book shares that. So there's an element besides just the source authors. There's an uplifting in the way that Jesus is described in the Urantia book.
And Bobbie, isn't it true that Steve, I think, had a spiritual experience around that text?
Fear that God, I don't remember.
Well, I remember when he was sharing it with me, there was a tear on his cheek. He was so profoundly affected by the shift in the meaning of that story that it just touched his heart. And that's what these human sources do. They touch your heart. When you read Rufus Jones, if you're not touched, you need to meditate and worship a little more.
Well, the difference between go and sin no more and go in peace, my sister, it's there's a compare and a contrast when you have the sources with the originals too. There's a little enlightenment, which is very exciting.
The fact that you bring up that story, because I went in search of it, the biblical account is, he said, let him among you who is without sin, let him cast the first stone, right? The Urantia book does not say that. And I went in search of that thinking it has to be in here, but it wasn't. And this was after I've read it for years. And then in the story, he says, they say that he wrote in the sand something. And each one of those men read what he wrote in the sand and then walked away. And you have to assume maybe he wrote something like that. Well, you have sinned. Maybe he knew something. They thought he couldn't possibly know. And he said something personal to each one. Who knows? But it doesn't say that he said, let he among you who is without sin, let him cast the first stone. It doesn't say that. And so that was always intriguing to me. And then he says to her, right, did no man stay to stone you, woman? And she said, no man, Lord. And it's just so Jesus encounters with women, even beyond what's ever said in any other religious text or the Bible. The Urantia book takes it so much further and just so beautifully. And, I'm with Andrea Barnes. She says, if God didn't write it, he should read it. And she also says, if it's not the way it is, it's the way it ought to be. And so,
and I think the experience that Steve had around that particular text, as we begin to study the text a little more thoughtfully, even more deeply than we do already, and we begin to compare the largest source, which is the Bible, to the text in the Urantia book, we will have similar spiritual epiphanies like Steve did.
Right.
As we see how, again, as you know so well, Paula, and you illustrate in your life, that God's love is unconditional, that there's no judgment here, that there's total acceptance and the recognition of the infinite value of each and every person. And as we read the texts as they were set in the Bible, and then we compare them to the Urantia revelation, I think our hearts will flower and blossom in ways that are unsuspected at this moment. What a blessing.
And, the book teaches us so much about unsung human heroes, right? And now we have these source authors who are also unsung human heroes. And have you pointed out that a lot of people don't even know about them anymore, like Rufus Jones. People don't know, or Henry Wyman, he's another author, right? People don't know his writings. But I'm hoping that this work you guys are working on will inspire people to go and find these writings and explore them and get in them.
Yeah. Well, again, there's so many, and the one we're focusing on in this issue of the Fellowship Herald is Ralph Tyler Llewellyn and the Roman Lectures. So again, when you look at what the book says, and as you said very accurately, Paula, when you look at what the book says and you compare it to Ralph Tyler Llewellyn, he's really eloquent and he's quite professorial, but the book is extraordinary. The poetry, the prose is poetry in the Urantia book, as we all know on the screen. And when you read it and you compare it to the human sources, you go, OMG. This revelatory commission, these midwares, these Orvanton commission, all of these individuals, what extraordinary personalities they are, and how wonderful it is going to be to meet them at some point in our Paradise career.
So explain this project in depth a little bit. It's going to focus, the first one is going to focus on who you just mentioned, the individual you just mentioned.
Yes.
Are you going to do a whole series of these on different source authors?
Well, we'll see. The big one that Steve and I wrestled a lot with is one you mentioned, Henry Wyman. So Henry Wyman, The Issues of Life, right? You can take chapter by chapter, you have the Rodin lectures. So, that's one that I think is worth bringing the needle into and threading it and understanding it more deeply. Because I think as much as any other text, the Wyman text, Issues of Life, was an extraordinary piece of literature. And you have to ask yourself the question, was Rodin speaking in the same chronological sequence as Henry Nelson Wyman? Because that's how the book presents it. And you need to, and again, Steve and I wrestled with these questions. You need to wrestle with these questions. My personal feeling is that Ralph Tyler Llewellyn and Henry Nelson Wyman and so many of these authors really had the big picture, really understood, if you will, cosmic consciousness and spiritual perception. And the Urantia revelators were just thrilled to bring their insights, their auto-revelation onto the table and make it part of the fifth epical revelation, which is why a lot of these people were offended at first, because a lot of people think of revelation as on a silver platter. And so here it is, it's pure, it's pristine, and no human hand has touched it. Well, bravo to the Revelatory Commission, because they say, actually, it's actually enhanced by passing through your heart and into your hands and onto paper. So bravo to these human sources who brought, if you will, revelation into their hearts, through their minds, and onto paper, and into the minds of so many people in the culture in which they lived.
I was thinking also that in sharing the truths of the Urantia book, instead of and of course, as we've grown with it, we're not doing this anymore. It used to be, the Urantia book says, well, what's the Urantia book? You can find these truths in these source authors who are respected scholars, professors, philosophers, scientists, so that those things which the truths of the Urantia book, which you would like to share, first by living in your life, but when the opportunity arises to share to someone who's interested, you don't have to basically talk about this, cultish book that might be offensive to someone. You can refer to scholars, scientists, philosophers who have basically the same thoughts.
Yeah, I mean the big shift in Western culture. I teach philosophy at the University of Nevada. Big shift in Western culture was Copernicus and Lavoisier and Sir Isaac Newton. Because when Sir Isaac Newton said, here's how gravity works, and he gave the formula, people went, OMG, this man has just stepped into the mind of God. He has just revealed what God was thinking when God provided, if you will, the fabric of gravity throughout the universe of universes. That's what each of these individuals have done. They've stepped into the spiritual as well as the scientific mind of God. And that presents, I think, from an evolutionary standpoint, an extreme opportunity, because we have lived on a world where the human species, especially in some of our religions, has been regarded as innately evil and sinful and the
Mm.
scum of the earth. And the revelators are saying, no, you are the vehicles through which revelation comes.
Mm.
We want you to step it up. We want you each to amplify it, whether you're in a ghetto or you're at the Stanford University or wherever you are, that you're part of the unfolding revelation of the Supreme in this age. And so welcome.
Isn't that wonderful? They do, and that explains the aha factor, where when you're reading, you say, I always knew that. That it's not an original thought. It's something you always knew. There's a truth there that resonates very deeply. And they show us not only that, but see what you've already figured out. You've already figured out a lot. Look at the beauty and the truth that's already in what you have. And you've mentioned several times auto revelations. I would love it if you would explain for any of our listeners who may not know exactly what you're talking about there, what that is, because I think it's a concept from the book that is vitally important.
Yeah, well, we are told in Proverbs, get thee wisdom. But we learn in the Urantia book a very interesting thing, that wisdom comes after worship. And so when we have a contemplative practice, a spiritual practice that begins to open up our minds and our hearts, something else begins to open up, a quality of compassion. And through that quality of compassion, a quality of wisdom begins to emerge, which is, how should I do what needs to be done, right? How should I go about it? And again, insights and intuitions begin to emerge, and we begin to be a source of revelation.
Mm.
And I used to surf, Paula, when I was young. It is like surfing the coolest wave ever. You are riding the energy. You are feeling the spray of the wind and the water. And you are recognizing that you're working with the universe. You're working with the energy of the universe. And you and each of us, and this is really, I do a lot of nonprofit work other than Urantia Foundation. And my definition of nonprofit work is to empower the individual to become exactly the person they were intended to be.
Mm.
And I tell my students, each of you has a gift that no other person, not mom, dad, sisters, brothers, no other person can reveal to you. Only you can discover it. And your function on this planet in this time is to discover that gift and manifest it. And so all the sectors in the nonprofit world are there to facilitate that discovery. And so better than all those sectors, as we all know on the screen, is the fifth epical revelation, which reveals how incredibly valuable each of us is.
That precious and unique self is an auto revelation, isn't it? It's God giving back to the universe through each unique individual. And I often tell people, like, when I was a teenager, I saw a writing on the wall, and I'm a person, I love words of wisdom, and they just stay with me. They stick in my heart, which is why I love Jesus so much. He was literally the fount of words of wisdom. And the poster I saw said, within every person, he holds the universe in which he must live. And it was a spiral staircase going down into infinity.
Wow.
And I thought, man, that is really profound stuff. I thought about that forever. And I realized that there is an inner universe, an inner life. And I think of auto revelation as coming from that inner universe out, and epical revelation coming from the outer universe in. And I explain that to people. I've introduced the Urantia book a lot to people, and so that's the way I explain the difference between the auto revelation and the epical revelation, and that the Urantia book claims to be an epical revelation, which is a big deal. It only happens once in a big period of time. And so, we don't have, the Urantia book gave us that, right? An understanding of those epical revelations and what they are, which is invaluable in itself, and an understanding of how important they are, which is so invaluable, to shore up what we can't figure out for ourselves, And being isolated the way we are, there's still probably a lot that we can't and haven't been able to figure out for ourselves. But
Well,
so
as you both know, I'm blessed to be married to an incredible lady who's an obstetrician and gynecologist. And last night at 3 o'clock in the morning, she brought in a new child of God. And she invariably tells the parents when that new child has come, congratulations, you have just co-created with the creator of the universe, a child without duplicate in all infinity, irreplaceable in all eternity. And can we have a moment of prayer? And invariably the parents enter into a prayer. And that's exactly, as we come into this world, that's exactly how we're supposed to be greeted. And that's how we're supposed to be greeted every day of our lives, while we're treading this, as Mo Siegel says, this very difficult neighborhood.
it's a tough neighborhood.
It's a tough neighborhood.
No doubt about it. But what a joyful project to be working on at this time. And I don't know if you both, I kind of get the feeling that we're living in a very special time. I mean, ever since I picked up the Urantia book, I felt like that, in all honesty. But it seems like it is building to a crescendo. I don't know what you think about that, but it's a great time to be doing works like this and bringing this to the fore.
I have a friend who's the head rabbi, chief rabbi in the Netherlands. His name is Rabbi Sodendorf. It was 1943. The Gestapo knocked on the door, and his family was there. And the Gestapo officer said, "It's too bad this baby is a Jew."
Mm.
And then the Gestapo officer had some kind of experience because he said, "I will return tomorrow," which was basically their invitation to exit. And they did. And now he's the chief rabbi of the Netherlands. He suggests that this is the holy decade, that the next 10 years, there needs to be more change than there has been in all pre-recorded history.
Wow.
And this next 10 years is going to be an accelerator.
Mm.
And so, as we know from the Urantia revelation, right, the angels of progress are starting to kick in. And so new systems, new institutions, new ways of being on the planet are emerging. And I'm watching this with fascination on several fronts. And so the angels, as busy as we are, the angels are even busier. And it's really a precious gift to be alive in this moment. And Steve Dreier knew that.
Mm.
And he embraced it with all the gusto and all the panache. May I use that word, Bobbie? Panache.
I love that. It's a great word.
I would say with all the noshes.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, it's we have a big job to do, and I think in many ways it's been overwhelming to us because we don't feel up to it. We don't feel like we're equal to it or good enough for it. But Derek came by today and he played he made a little video with a voiceover from Bill Sadler Jr. And what Sadler Jr. was saying is, let's make original mistakes. You probably remember that one, right, Gard? Let's make original mistakes. And when I leave this world, I want people to say about me, boy, he made some great original mistakes that we can all learn from.
Yeah.
That's it. We don't know exactly what the right thing to do is, but we step forward with faith and courage, and we make the most out of a difficult task.
Yeah, my wife and I started a free and charitable clinic here in Southern Nevada, and we say we are building this airplane even as we fly it.
Which is the story, right? Down here, we all get to learn by doing,
Mm-hmm.
and it's
that one of the best parts of it is the growth of the family. I mean, having sustained the passing of Steve 18 months ago, I don't know how I would have really been able to go on without the loving support of the community of Urantia book readers who are my brothers and sisters. It is so palpably, lovingly helpful, and it's the expression of what we're learning by reading the book. It's the reality of the love of God revealed, and it's just a thrill and a blessing, So
Yeah, it's amazing how afraid we are, right, of death, and how as long as man's been on the planet, that has been the great fear and the great question as what happens now, what happens afterwards. And the Urantia book answers that so beautifully and so repletely.
Yeah.
And I've never met a reader that didn't have absolute faith in that moment. And I think, your precious story about Steve holding your son's hand saying, well, I'm going to go to sleep now and I'll either wake up here or in the next world. How precious is that? And, my own friend Don Green, when he died, the doctors and nurses couldn't get over how cheerful this guy was. And he told me at one point, Paula, it's great. They get on me hand and foot and I get to watch TV all day. And he said, I've got my ticket punched and I'm ready to go. And he was just so happy. And the doctors and nurses didn't know quite what to do with someone who had such a great attitude about leaving this world, and such faith around that.
Yeah.
Well,
Mark shared at the celebration of Steve's life that we had recently. My son is an emergency room doctor, and he said he's seen a few people die, but he never saw anyone, go the way his dad did. He really had a smile on his face, and I think it was such a revelation and a blessing for Mark to have been able to experience that.
Yeah. What a gift of angels that he was able to be there with him when very few had their loved one with them. That was such a precious gift.
Bobbie, wasn't there a sense that Steve actually experienced something celestial?
He was saying he was seeing something. He was calling it Christmas lights, but it was April, so
Christmas lights.
That's conversion. A good Jewish boy calling it Christmas lights. I'm going to tell you.
You got it. Right. Well, I want to say I so appreciate the gifts that each of us brings, and especially Paula, your ability to remember text and to share it the way you do, and Gard, having brought me and so many others to the importance of spending quiet time with our Father in heaven. It's just been an incredible journey of reading the Urantia book and coming to appreciate all those wonderful brothers and sisters who love and want to be loved and are loved. It's just been great. And Paula, thank you for doing this. You have such a wonderful way of drawing out people and of enhancing whatever the topic is. I really value that, and I appreciate it so much.
Well, I have so many cherished memories with both of you. My heart is so full right now. I feel like it's going to burst. I've been looking forward to this interview for so long. And
there's another one coming up, Paula, because Marilyn Kulicki and I are working on a new history of the book. And we're really wanting to integrate all five of the legs of the stool, so that we understand the place of the human sources. We also understand the culture in which the Urantia revelation was birthed. 20th century was not an easy time to be alive on this planet.
No.
Again, this is really just sort of the beginning, the prelude to really appreciating the extraordinary personalities that were involved with this revelation, from the contact personality and his wife, to the contact commission, to the forum, to all of the various individuals, and most especially the revelatory commission. And those midwares are still watching us, so we still have to report in and to be responsible for our lives here on this planet. So to integrate our life plan with the fifth epoch revelation, there can be no greater joy. I think Hafiz says it well. You've been given a divine invitation. That boils your choices down to just two. You can come dressed for dancing, or you can be carried in by the pallbearers. And I share that with my students. I say, I want to dance. How about you guys?
I'm down with dancing. Let's spend our lives, right? Don't waste them, spend them. Time is our one true talent. And in that vein, Gard, and I just want to mention this, there's this great parenthetical statement in the Urantia book, not only about the Reserve Corps of Destiny, but then they talk about the Cosmic Reserve Corps. And I think it's one of the most intriguing statements in the book. They talk about these living men and women now living at the time when that was written, probably, I don't know, 1933, 1934, that paper was written. And they say they're uniquely conscious of their universe citizenship. And he goes on to say he's forbidden to tell us what their mission is or their role. I've come to believe that a lot of them were the source authors.
Yeah.
And that they lived in that time that the revelators were here, because they were uniquely able to pick up those great that great mentation, that great intellect that was here on the planet. I personally believe that mentation, that intellect that was here, changed the world forever, just like Jesus changed the world forever. Yeah. And we can't underestimate the impact of the divine counselor and the mighty messenger and the perfecter of wisdom and all these magnificent beings coming to our world to give us a revelation. And these humans that picked up on it and brought it through. And their primary, job then was to see those and pick them out, those golden threads, and weave them together into a meaningful whole for us. And that's really the way I've come to look at the revelation, as this wonderful partnership between the revelators and the humans. And they both played an equal role. And you mentioned it early on, the 5 groups that were responsible, including the forum, who asked the questions, and they really pulled humans to find out what it was they were wanting to know. And when they got a good handle on that, they brought those papers through. What a magnificent thing this revelation is.
It is. Almost makes you giddy.
Makes me giddy. I mean, I just never can get over it, and I never want to. When I petition the universe that we have some equivalent of it up there.
Yeah, and I want to shout out one other source author before we go, and that's John Bailey. John Bailey wrote The Interpretation of Religion. He was the spiritual director of the current Queen of England.
Wow.
And he was living in a time after World War II in which his advisement to that queen and to the leaders in England, and England at that time, as you may recall, there wasn't a place on the planet that England didn't have a colony or rule. Mm. And all of that began to shift in an incredible way. Just as the wall in Berlin came down, all of that began to shift. And again, who knows where inspiration sprung from? But I think John Bailey was part of that inspiration as India rose its flag and Great Britain took down its flag. And on and on and on. Last night with my class, we watched the movie Gandhi. And it always brings tears to my eyes because we watched the last part of it where Gandhi again goes to Calcutta, and through a fast, he brings an end to the warfare between the Muslims and the Hindus. But at the end, there's a quote, which is, it appears in this moment that tyrants and despots are winning, but history proves that they will never win. They are always defeated. But in the end, love wins. That's what we get from this magnificent revelation. So people like John Bailey and Mahatma Gandhi and Rufus Jones, in my opinion, I think they were in the club.
I think they were in the club. When I was in India, it was the book fair I was at was dedicated to Gandhi, and they had a rotunda with all of his writings in it. And I wandered in there and picked up this little booklet called My Religion and started reading it. And I thought, oh my gosh, I have to have this. So I spent the whole rest of the time asking all the booksellers if they had it, and none of them did. But
No.
I was able to find it, and it was like right out of the Urantia book. It was the same conceptual. It was God. It was our God that we know from the Urantia book, and he had a deep, abiding respect for.
And Gandhi said his two favorite texts were the Bhagavad-Gita and the Sermon on the Mount. So we know in paper 140, right? That's the headwaters of everything in the fourth epoch of Revelation. When you really understand the Beatitudes, you understand the gospel, because that's where it begins and that's where it ends.
Yeah.
So again, when Gandhi said, when asked, what's your religion? Everybody thinking he was a Hindu. He said, well, I'm a Hindu, I'm a Buddhist, I'm a Christian, I'm a Jew, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Taoist. And again, what was Jesus? He wasn't a Christian.
Right.
He wasn't a Jew. He was the Son of God. And that's what the fifth epoch of Revelation reveals to each of us, that we're not this or that.
Mm.
We are not the clouds in the sky. We are the sky.
Mm. Irreplaceable, as you said, your wife says, irreplaceable in infinity, without duplicate in all eternity.
Yeah.
That's our value, really. And it puts it right on us in such a beautiful way. So if someone wanted to get involved with you guys or help in some way, what could they do? Could they help with this project, or is there somewhere they can leave you comments, or
Yeah. It's just contact me or Bobbie. You can contact me through your Ranch Foundation if you're interested. And what we need are people who are really dedicated readers of the Revelation, who are interested in diving deeper and taking a text like The Issues of Life by Weeman and beginning to understand it in relation to the Revelation and beginning to be able to respond, because there are going to be, like the readers back when this was first initiated, there's going to be media on this, and they're going to be highly critical of all this. So to get responsible scholars, responsible individuals who have actually done the work, this is what Steve was so passionate about. Let's get some individuals who've done the work, who can stand up and respond. As Bobbie said so accurately, the truth never suffers from honest examination.
right.
We want to be able to say that to anybody we meet, including the media, and say, there's nothing here that I'm afraid to be fed. This is a revelation, and I know it. I know it.
Exactly right. It's so important to be able to say that with confidence and rest assured, because it is, if it's not, show me the real deal. I want to see the real thing if this isn't it, because this thing is extraordinary. But what were you going to say?
I would say the magazine is going to be sent out to the whole readership. I think the whole mailing list, and it can be somewhat scholarly, but I would say if you want to be informed and if you're interested, read it. Just read it, and then from there you can go on to reading the original source books if you want. But it'll give you a taste for some of the ideas that are expressed.
Now we know that they can go to the Urantia Foundation and find most of the original source books. I don't know if there's all of them. Would you say there's all of them there, Gard?
I think we're still searching. So all of them is going to be a while before we got.
What do you recommend for people who want to delve in? Is there a list? I mean, I know Matthew's work is pretty definitive too, but is there an easy way for people to find some of the source writings?
Yeah, so in the back of this issue of the Herald, you'll see a list of individuals and their books and the papers that they're related to. And what I would say, I mean, for me, as we all know, the supreme revelation of the book is the idea and concept of personality. And as we know, the evolutionary ideas of personality are very different, right? We're told that worms have personality. Well, maybe not. Character, maybe. But the idea of personality, and that's Ralph Tyler Llewellyn. He is the personalist. He was the chair of the Department of Philosophy at
Wow.
USC. If you live on the West Coast, I encourage you to go to his library, the Who's Library on the campus of USC. You will be blown away by the inspiration in that library. You will see his picture. You will recognize an individual who has dedicated his life to sharing the really incredible revelation of what personality is. And what everybody needs to know is that Martin Luther King was a student at Boston University. Everything that Martin Luther King said emerged from his primary reality, which was the understanding of personality as he understood it from people like Ralph Tyler Llewellyn, and Edgar Brightman, and the personalists who taught there at Boston University.
I love that. Thank you for that. So that will be in the issue, and I'm glad to know that. That's going to be fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you both for your research and your effort in this regard. I think it's a very important project. I'm so proud of the fellowship for helping to fund it. I know it's going to take a lot more than just the second miler grant and the hours you two spend on it and the hours you've invested in research. You're just both amazing. Is there anything else you want to tell our listeners before we sign off? And it could be anything you like. It doesn't have to be about the project.
Bobbie?
Oh, I guess I just want to share gratitude for, for the blessing of having found the revelation, and through the revelation, the experience and the consciousness of God in my life, and my beautiful brothers and sisters. I don't know what else to say. I'm amazed, but I'm living in a state of bliss, and I'm just so grateful to God. Yeah, that's all I could say.
Yeah,
Well, we're all grateful for her, aren't we, Gard?
Yep.
Say that unequivocally.
Love that lady. And I want to say, I think, following the words of Peter, neglect not your daily worship. Every day make a divine appointment, because the world is craving for individuals who will take that divine time, that appointment, and who will immerse themselves, as you said, Paula, in the golden world within ourselves, the soul that we are growing. The world is yearning for this, and we can all see it. We all know it. So most importantly is make your divine appointment. If God were to knock on your door, right, Bobbie, and say, "Hey, Bobbie, you got 20 minutes for me?" Bobbie would go, "Yes, sir."
Yes, sir. I sure do.
And so I encourage everybody to make that divine appointment and to really attend to it faithfully, because that's what's going to transform the world. Transformed individuals.
Live that love. Let yourself be the conduit, right?
Gard, what's the greatest lesson we'll ever learn?
Just to love and be loved in return. Thank you, Nat King Cole.
Yeah. Oh, boy. Isn't that the truth? Well, thank you, beautiful souls. I am so delighted that you were on today and share this wonderful project, and I can't wait to see it come to fruition. And love you dearly. I thank you with all my heart for all that you do.
Thank you, Paula. You are an inspiration to both of us. And behind the curtain, there's a lady named Christina. I want to shout out to her.
Oh my God!
She is
An angel, an absolute angel. Unbelievable. Thank you, Christina.
Bobbie called her a whirling dervish, but I call her a whirling dervish with a violin in her. Incredible.
She just whirls around me.
Our darling Christina. Oh, love you so much. So thanks, you guys.